So the Trinitas Amarone, very special wine, especially for my father, Tim. Amarone, my dad discovered back in the late 90s. A priest friend of his asked, "Hey Tim, have you ever had Amarone before?" Dad goes, "I've never heard of Amarone. What's Amarone?" Well, he tasted it that evening at dinner and fell in love with the wine. Amarone is made in one region of the world. It's made in the Valpolicella region in northern Italy. It's only made there. And the thing that makes it unique is the production process. So Amarone is actually the only wine on the planet that's made by drying grapes post-harvest that's not a dessert wine. So you'll taste this, it's rich, and it's got a lot of big, bold flavors in it, but it's not a dessert wine. So how do we do that? Well, we pick the fruit, Corvina, Corvinone, and Rondinella. We put them in wood racks that stack up. You can't have it in a big bin because if the fruit is too heavy, it'll actually crush itself and the juice will start coming out, right? But because we're gonna be drying this fruit for 90 days or more, we have to pick the perfect fruit out of the vineyard. And then we stack it, like I said, in these racks. But you gotta have them layered and you have to have fans and dehumidifiers going. This is a really risky process. Very, very different than how we make most of our wines. But what happens is during that 90 days, you have these perfect berries in bunches and they start to dehydrate a little bit. And it's almost like a raisioning process, but not quite to that level of dehydration. And during that period, the sugars are concentrating, the skins are concentrating, the flavors, the tannins, everything coalesces and comes together to make a denser, richer, just completely unique flavored wine. So it takes about 90 days to do that, and in that 90 days, we have half of our juice lost. So it takes double the amount of fruit to make a bottle of our Amarone Classico as it does to make any typical bottle of red wine. So when you have that happening, it just changes the flavor profile, and like I said, one of the most important things is it concentrates the sugars. So Amarone, because we're fermenting the dryness, is going to be a very high octane wine, we like to say. So by law, Amarone has to be at least 15% alcohol. Typically ours ranges in that 15.5 to 16%, but really it all depends on the vintage. So that's the drying process, and so it's really interesting because we're actually crushing the fruit in January after the drying versus doing it in October or so when we typically harvest. So then that's the Classico, right? We do 90 days of dry aging, and then typically we do a really prolonged barrel aging in French oak barrels for typically about 3.5 to 4 years, depending on the year, because Amarone is meant to lay down for a long, long time. But then we have another wine that we do that's our Reserva. So both these wines, they're coming from the same vineyards, both from Valpolicella, but Reserva Amarone is very special. It can only be made in the very best of vintages there in Valpolicella. So this Classico, right, that we're making, you already, for any Amarone, you have to pick the best fruit in the vineyard because we're gonna be dry aging the grapes, not for 90 days, but 120 or more days of dry aging. So instead of that 50% that you typically lose on your Classico, you're losing upwards of almost 70% of your juice, and you need 3 times as many grapes to make a bottle of Reserva. So it's a completely rare process and unique process, but we love to make this Reserva because it's even richer and denser, and sometimes it's so concentrated that there is just a pinch of residual sugar in there that kind of rounds out the finish. And so Reservas typically exhibit a lot more bright red fruit, whereas your Classico is going to be a little bit spicier. Then we extend barrel age it as well. So Reservas can be in barrel up to 5 years. So a really, really long barrel aging process. In both the Classico and the Reserva, we do a bottle aging as well. We're usually releasing our Amarone and it's 6 or 7 years old already by the time you first get it in your glass. So it's a really special wine that has a whole labor of love that goes into it, and it just is such a unique wine. My dad discovered the wine first back in the late 90s. So he starts going around to different wineries. Hey, I would love to make an Amarone at Trinitas because it's one of my favorite wines in the world. they all kind of looked at him like he was nuts. And just basically said, well, we don't really do that here. And of course, we don't even have the varietals growing in California. And so my dad changed his whole outlook on it and said, forget that. We're not going to make it in Northern California. I wouldn't even be able to call it Amarone. So I'm going to go to the source, and we're going to find someone who can help us and partner with us to make a real Amarone from Valpolicella in Northern Italy. So this started a whole multi-year excursion and journey to make this really special and unique wine. And so it was very frustrating for him because it took years and years of trying to find this special partner. So finally, he was at dinner with my mom at a beautiful little kind of small boutique hotel in the Valpolicella region called the Biblos, and they're having dinner. He gets a wine list out, he looks at it, and he says, Fuminelli. I've never heard of this wine before, this brand of Amarone. And my dad not hearing of a brand of Amarone is impossible, so of course his interest was piqued. What's the story on this wine? And of course the waiter and oh, Fuminelli, molto buono, oh, it's beautiful and everything. So that's okay, we'll do a bottle of that. So first sip in, he tastes it, and he looks at my mom and he goes, I don't even know this winery. I don't know who these people are. This is who is going to help us make this Amarone happen. So the next day, he somehow got a hold of someone at the winery and was able to set an appointment. So he gets up, gets over there early, like 9:30 in the morning, rolls into this beautiful estate that was built back in the late 1400s. So the Fuminellis have been in the wine growing and making business for a long time. Comes into a room, long table, and at the end sits a gentleman about my father's age, dressed in a sport coat with a little pocket square. And he says, Mr. Bush, welcome to my winery. My name is Armando Fuminelli. My dad's like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, I'm meeting the owner of the vineyard and everything. And so, he starts talking to him, and my dad is just taken aback by the beautiful surroundings. They're starting to taste wine. It's amazing, obviously, but it's so interesting because he starts talking to Armando, says, yes, I enjoyed your wine last night at the Biblos Hotel. And Armando says, oh, yes, the Biblos. Yes, that's one of my properties. And my dad goes, that's interesting. He goes, you're in wine, I'm in wine. You're in hospitality, I'm in hospitality. And so he says, well, that's cool. He goes, I didn't know that you did anything outside of wine. Armando says, yes, we do some hotels and hospitality as well. My dad goes, we do as well. And Armando goes, well, that's interesting. And he goes, well, so tell me more. And my dad goes, we have a winery in Napa. And Armando goes, Napa Valley? You have a Napa Valley winery? And so they had this mutual excitement about meeting each other, which was fun. And my dad tells him, yeah, and we also have a property there in Napa called the Meritage Resort. And at that point it got quiet, and Armando says, wait, the Meritage? And he goes, of course. And he says, I stayed there last year, and I went into the cave and I had wine, and my dad's like, the cave, that's us, that's Trinitas. And so it sort of at that moment clicked that it was meant to be. It was a super small world moment. And after about a half an hour together, my dad said it's like they knew each other for 15 years, like they've been old friends. So at one point in the dinner, my dad just says, Armando, I know we've just met, but I'd love to partner with you and make Amarone. And Armando kind of thinks about it and he says, Tim, we don't really do that, but for you, we'll do it. And so they shook hands, and now we're in the Amarone business. Now, when we're talking about pairings, I gotta take this back to the classic Amarone pairing and what Italians think of and what they make when they're doing Amarone. So it's a hearty wine, right? A lot of big red fruit, but a lot of spicy components too. So there's just a lot of layers to this wine and a richness on the finish. And so they actually like to use wild game, so specifically a wild boar, and they braise it in like a chocolate sauce. And you're not thinking dessert here. Think of more like a Mexican mole style. That's kind of the closest comparison we have here in the States. And so you have this beautiful, big, bold, kind of gamey meat, and it's softened and tenderized by the sauce, and those chocolates pair with kind of the barrel notes in the wine. And then, of course, this big, bright, juicy tannins that we get in Amarone just really cut through the fat in that wild boar. And it's a really special meal. It's a big occasion when we make this, and this wine deserves a big occasion. So we hope you enjoy it with yours.